This morning, I realized I've been totally MIA for like over a week. I got a couple comments and messages late last night, early this morning, and you can consider this video proof of life. I mean, you can't see my face right now because I'm recording this early in the morning, and I don't want to be seen at this hour, nor do I really want to see anyone else, but those are some perks of working from home, I guess. There's been, I guess, a combination of things going on. When I have personal stuff, I sometimes just appear to have wandered off because I don't tell people, though I can see why that would worry people. So here I am. I'm also still studying for a test, and then I recently picked up a second job again. So with all that, I just needed to touch grass in my free time for a little while. The last stream I did was about the injunction Laura Owens had filed against Rob, who is another YouTuber that lives around the Phoenix area somewhere. So there was a motion to quash that injunction filed by Rob's attorney, which I have some thoughts on, but before I talk about that, I want to say a little bit about my thought process here. There has been a hearing set now in this case, and it's set for February 18th, so that's a week from today. So when Rob first showed me the petition, I told him she made him sound like a fucking psycho. Like, I didn't mince words. I told him to definitely get a lawyer. He told me a lot of things were taken out of context. Some of it was him reading comments made by other people, and some of it flat out just did not exist in the videos and transcripts she was citing. This is not a slight to Rob or anyone else. I don't have time to watch a lot of other people's content these days, so I give him a chance to kind of talk about some of the stuff that had come up in the petition, and it's good that he's going to have a chance to defend himself in court. But I started seeing some comments the next day about a clip of some things that he said. I didn't have the clip, but eventually I asked someone to send it to me. My initial reaction to that was that it was surprising he would say those things. I've met him twice, and generally my interactions with people in person are going to be where I kind of make my opinions about them. I still feel that legal consequences are not appropriate for offensive speech, but that doesn't mean that, people have to be okay with that socially. I just wanted to handle that in the right way for myself, because generally if someone upsets me or says something that I don't like, I'm going to think about whether or not that was their intention, and I'll go from there. I felt like he's someone who wouldn't say those things if he knew it would be hurtful for people that he likes or cares about. So we had a private conversation where I told him those kinds of comments can be disturbing and triggering to other people, including myself. And it was very well received. I feel like how someone responds to those conversations is important, and I think it's up to him to do better in the future. But he knows how I feel about those kinds of comments. I think when I've met someone or know someone versus just knowing them on the internet, I tend to handle things in a way that's a little more personal. And I did the best thing that I thought I could do that would be, helpful, not only in addressing that I felt those things were inappropriate, but also in a way that could be helpful for somebody who I really do think could do better than that. Now, that's not really for me to tell other people how to feel. I think everyone has to express themselves and handle their feelings how they need to. But I also need to kind of limit myself right now to not take on a lot of other people's feelings, which is a thing I struggle with. I think I'm out of my depth socially with that kind of thing. I've, worked through my own feelings in the way I felt was appropriate and best for me, and that's all I can do. I think the content of the offensive comments was, it's understandably upsetting to a lot of people. I think that my, trying to respond to people who are upset by that is not going to be super helpful. I think that leads to conversations that have like heightened defensiveness and emotions and sensitivity, at least on my end. And with the way my brain works, it puts me in a position where I start to fail in some ways socially when it comes to understanding and interpreting people's tones or intent, especially when the communication is strictly on a screen and it's with strangers. I get blunt in my communication in a way that makes people think I'm trying to fight with them or be hostile. And it's all around just not a good situation because the communication breakdown makes me feel emotional and kind of ashamed, especially when I feel misunderstood. So I usually explicitly tell people I need to disengage with the conversation or I need to not talk for a while. And sometimes that upsets people even more, which sucks. Unfortunately, when we only know people on the internet, there's, a lot we don't know about each other. So people get offended by my delivery or disappointed that I ultimately can't give them the reaction they were hoping for. And it sucks, but I can't reasonably be expected to kind of go through what I'm describing with dozens and dozens of strangers. It's not humanly possible to do that and to maintain a healthy level of distance so I can protect my own mental health and continue to prioritize my life offline. So I'm not gonna sit here and tell everyone how they should feel or why they should feel a certain way or why something is right or something is wrong. I'll tell you what I feel and what I believe, and if you want to listen, you can. But understand, I know that doesn't really mean anything for anyone else. I personally don't believe in using the legal system to punish people for upsetting speech. I know that stance is offensive to some people. I know Some people want me to have a different approach, but ultimately I wanted to handle this my own way, which was to treat someone how I would want to be treated if I made poor decisions that hurt people, and that wasn't my intent. I clearly haven't always had the most polite or measured reactions to Laura or David. Trying to punish people legally for the reactions to the horrible things they've done, in my opinion, is just an attempt at distraction and weird revenge. Some people can call them names, they make jokes, make memes, make videos, whatever. I've insulted them plenty myself, and I've been on the receiving end of plenty of their bullshit. So I'm not here to tell people how to respond to Laura's shit show. I can have my own ideas of right and wrong. My friends and other people in the community will have their own. I don't speak for anyone but myself, and no one else speaks for me. I can't control what other people say or how other people respond to it. If someone crosses a line making jokes about assault or does something I personally feel is wrong, I can tell them how I feel and pay attention to how they respond. And how I choose to relate to them in the future will depend on that response. But I can't and I won't tell anyone else what to do here. I think I've made plenty of mistakes trying to manage everything people would bring to me in the way that everyone would think is right, but it's not possible. I only manage myself, I communicate for myself, and that's it. I'm also just needing a little more space because I think that anyone who puts their name and face out there is kind of putting themselves at risk of being painted in the most unflattering light possible. I think we're talking about someone who will call the police across the country or the FBI because she doesn't like what people say about her on the internet. I do have to kind of be mindful of how these things play out because she's dragged my name through the mud before in a court case I had absolutely nothing to do with, saying things that were completely untethered from reality, and she and her works-for-free lawyer have nothing but time to continue to try to punish random people and social media accounts for their speech in ways that don't even make any sense sometimes. But we're all going to have people who don't like the way we talk or respond to things, and so with that in mind, I'm sure, someday the people will get out the pitchforks for me too, but I don't need to know about it. It doesn't need to be my business. Other people's negative opinions of me are for them. I want to mostly limit my involvement in these things online to my own commentary at this point. I'll just be here doing my best. That's all I got. So the last thing I'll say before I get into my notes on this actual quash motion is that I did not dial into the bankruptcy hearing myself. Patrick gave me a call to tell me how it went, and I've seen some of the notes people took. It seems to me that she's saying things that don't make sense given the statements she's made in the past. Some of those statements were even under oath. This maneuver where she tries to pivot to David is not going to work here. I was told that she kind of threw him under the bus in regards to an affidavit she had filed in Clayton's case, which wouldn't be surprising to me, but I'm not an expert in the bankruptcy stuff by any means. I know the bare minimum about bankruptcy. It's just not my thing. So I can't really give you a fully formed opinion on that until and unless I've listened to it or watched it. I hear Rob's lawyer comes pretty highly recommended. I'm not going to read this whole motion, but there were a couple things that poked out. Here he writes, the injunction should be quashed because it represents an attempt by the defendant in a highly publicized criminal case, Laura Owens, to retaliate against and suppress the speech of an online commentator who has made statements about her criminal case that she simply does not like. Plaintiff Laura Owens is facing 14 felony charges, including perjury, forgery, tampering with evidence, and identity theft for allegedly lying and falsifying records to support false paternity allegations against two men, including a former star of the reality TV show The Bachelor. Given the subject matter and the involvement of a celebrity, the criminal case against Owens has gained widespread attention both in Arizona and worldwide. And when I read that, I thought back to how she identified herself as a public figure on her website, and how she's kind of marketed herself on LinkedIn and otherwise as some sort of boss babe big deal. And she's used that public figure status to make a TEDx talk, completely lying about her experience with an ex, who we know to be Mike Marraccini, one of her other victims, and the way she faked abuse by Mike in some of the most offensive ways I think a person could come up with. It's kind of ridiculous that she should try to punish people for offensive speech. I can't condone the contents of some of what was said if it was said the way that it was outlined in the petition, because I still have not seen these things and I can't verify. I'm not asking anyone else to. At this point, I'm just going to operate, let's say that the things that were outlined were actually said. Let's assume that they were, which I know not all of them were. But it's kind of interesting that she tries to punish speech like that when she has done the most offensive things within the realm of her possibility. We know, as his lawyer mentions here, that Rob goes to pick up the documents. He's gone to the public court hearings. I know she complained about that and something about his proximity to her in her petition. So a lot of the stuff in there, again, is just a distraction. And I'm not talking about the offensive comments. I'm talking about going to the court. People have a right to attend public proceedings. There's nothing improper about that. And then sitting up close in the front of the courtroom due to your disability, and you're in the assigned disability seating, again, is not a crime. The fact that she's trying to throw that in there is a little ridiculous to me. The lawyer here writes, and contrary to Owens' mischaracterizations and outright fabrications of what Rob actually said, nothing in those live streams meets the criteria of the statute. Not only was his speech not directed at Owens, it was publicly posted online for the world to see. It did not contain any threatening or harassing statements that would support entry of an injunction that punishes and suppresses his speech. So when it comes to offensive speech, even highly offensive speech, or people saying mean things about you, especially as a public figure, they do have a right to express those things. There's a very high burden for what would be considered beyond the boundaries of free speech. And when people are saying things that upset you online, you can think they're a terrible person. There can be social consequences for that. There can be backlash. There can be maybe even consequences with your employer if they're upset about that, or if they have social media policies. But to use the legal system in a way that would take someone else's rights away, that's not appropriate. You can make your own video or blog or whatever talking about that person and how you hate everything they said and you think everything they said is a lie. But ultimately, when it comes to her refusal to stop watching content about her and stop listening to people that she doesn't like, we as adults have to exercise a certain amount of self-control to say, like, this is not something that I should be listening to or watching if I find it distressing. If you put yourself out there into the universe by contacting a bunch of tabloids and you lie to people and those people get upset and they start talking about it online, they're allowed to do that. It's up to Laura at that point, at the big age of 35, to be an adult and say, this is not healthy for me. I need to walk away from the computer. I need to not look at this website. Or, as I said, she can go back to medium.com and write about how terrible she thinks Rob is as a person and how everything he said is gross and why she thinks there should be social consequences for that. And then other people will see it, have their feelings, and react accordingly. Plenty of people will see comments like that and think, ew, that's gross. I never want to listen to this person again. That's a consequence of offensive speech. And those kinds of consequences are reciprocal and appropriate. Now, I'm speaking generally here. I'm not speaking about anyone's specific feelings or even mine. You guys, I already explained my kind of thought process, but I'm just speaking generally in a situation like this. The lawyer mentions that in Clayton's case, the court awarded him all those fees, finding that she filed her claim without basis or merit and had provided false testimony. And so a lot of the stuff that she complains about in her petition, where she's talking about her medical issues or whatever, which is totally irrelevant. You can't force people through the courts to believe you about your medical conditions when you've lied about certain medical conditions as found by the court. Faking a pregnancy and a miscarriage is faking medical conditions. So again, I feel like using the courts to address her feelings about those statements, about her not having autism or any number of conditions she's come up with in the meantime, I feel like it's inappropriate to use the courts to address that. Go to your blog. I mean, that's not actual advice. I don't think she should go to her blog. I'm saying she can. I mean, if she goes to her blog, she might just reveal another crime she's committed, but at this point, it's not anybody's problem but hers, and maybe Jan's. So going back to what the lawyer is writing here, it says the petition requests an order prohibiting Rob from possessing firearms and requiring him to stay away from Owens' residence, work/business, and school/other, and to stop targeting me through harassment or surveillance, including monitoring or commenting on my location, travel, or court attendance, encouraging others to impersonate me or determine my whereabouts, and making sexualized or threatening statements about me. If respondent attends court, require him to remain at reasonable distance from me and have no interaction. So as we know from the bankruptcy hearing, because I did hear about this, she's never had any income in her life, apparently, or so she says. So work/business, I'm not sure she really needed to include that there. I don't think anyone's trying to get near the residence, the casita, unless they have some weird desire for like danger in the form of going near things that are completely unsanitary. I don't think anyone has ever approached her residence. She doesn't go to school that I know of. I don't know what the other would be, maybe Barry's, but I don't think Rob goes to Barry's. Threatening statements, obviously that's something you can't do. I've personally never witnessed any threats being made, and I'm actually not just going to take her word for it. So that's something that they'll have to deal with in court. Again, they've had no interaction in court, so I'm not really sure what the point of putting that in there was, other than to kind of like make a thinly veiled accusation that there was some sort of interaction when there wasn't, at least not anything that's actually even been alleged. Says much of the petition consists of Owens complaining about alleged comments by Rob or his viewers that express skepticism about her representation to the court in her criminal case and predict that she will be convicted and go to prison, or that use vulgar terms referring to her. For example, Owens asserts that Rob made sexualized and coercive comments by merely mentioning his proximity to her while he was observing public court proceedings, and casts as a threat a statement that her day of reckoning is coming, referring to her upcoming trial. So I wanted to mention there that, some statements are misrepresented. Calling the trial the day of reckoning, that's like a legal consequence. That's not referring to some sort of physical attack. So casting that as a threat is a little bit much. I think that's actually just a fact. When somebody says there's going to be a reckoning, it means there's going to be like consequences or judgment. I guess I would feel threatened by that if I had done 14 felonies and counting, but like an injunction can't help you with that. That's your problem. Much of the petition misrepresents what Rob actually said. In his declaration attached as Exhibit D, Rob explains that many of the statements attributed to him do not appear in the video recordings or transcripts of the live streams. She alleges, for example, that he said, "I'll fucking bitch slap her through the phone, through the camera, whatever I can get to her." But nothing of the sort appears anywhere in the transcript of the video. This court should quash the injunction because Owens is not shown and cannot prove that Rob engaged in harassment as defined by the statute, and because the injunction impermissibly restricts his constitutionally protected speech on issues of public concern. In brief, Owens' allegations in this civil matter are no more reliable than the claims in her unsuccessful paternity lawsuit against Mr. Eckerd or her various statements that gave rise to the state's criminal indictment of her for perjury, forgery, and the like. His commentary on Owens' criminal case does not remotely qualify as harassment under the statute. First, although his YouTube videos are about Owens, they are not directed at her. Even according to her own allegations, he never contacted her, either directly or through a third person. His declaration affirms that he has never communicated with her. The law's requirement that the harassment be directed at the plaintiff means the statements made to others do not qualify, even if the plaintiff becomes aware of them. That Owens can, like anyone else with an internet connection, view his video commentaries about her does not mean those commentaries are directed at her, and she cannot be harassed by them as a matter of law. Second, that he allegedly offended her by mocking and criticizing her using purportedly vulgar and sexually charged language does not transform his commentary about her criminal prosecution into harassment. And he cites the Court of Appeals here. It says, in public debate, our own citizens must tolerate insulting and even outrageous speech in order to provide adequate breathing space to the freedoms protected by the First Amendment. Insults and invectives such as those Owens accuses him of saying are simply not harassment under the definition of the statute. To be sure, his seeming endorsement of pretending to be Owens in a phone call to determine if she was attending a horse show as well as helping a sick relative was unwise, but it was not threatening. No one would have any reasonable expectation of privacy in their attendance at an event open to the public, so even an improper attempt to determine their attendance would provide no more information than could be gathered by anyone else at the event. Owens does not allege that she actually attended any horse show, that he or any of his viewers actually impersonated her, or that she was followed or menaced by anyone. Third, his speech serves a legitimate purpose, speech about a closely watched criminal prosecution in which Owens is charged with 14 felonies. The videos are commentary about issues of public concern, which occupies the highest rung of the hierarchy of the First Amendment values and is entitled to special protection. Because the videos related to matters of political, social, or other concern to the community, they serve that legitimate, constitutionally protected purpose. The statements encouraging investigation into whether Owens was attending horse shows, for example, served another legitimate purpose, discussion of whether a criminal defendant had misled the court in obtaining permission to travel out of state. Finally, the injunction is unconstitutionally overbroad because it prohibits protected speech under the Arizona Constitution and the First Amendment. It would bar him from encouraging his viewers to impersonate her by portraying her in a satirical skit or dramatic recreation of her alleged crimes, for example, which is clearly unconstitutional. It would prohibit him from encouraging his viewers to have any contact with her, even constitutionally protected contact, such as sending her non-threatening or even supportive letters or emails. Well, so then she might not get those friendly emails she and David always say they're getting. Whether or not they actually get any supportive emails, I don't know or care. Anyways, there were a bunch of attachments to this, which I think were like transcripts, exhibits of transcripts and stuff like that. I don't know if I can show those here or if I even have them to pull up, but I'm not going to go through all that right now. I don't think we need to. Like I said, that hearing's been set for next week, February 18th, and we'll see how that goes. I know his lawyer's supposed to be really great, so hopefully it will turn out in their favor. But that's about all I got right now, so I'll talk to you guys later. Thanks.